It's not about knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. It's about being able to respond to it and having that agility.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here.
Hey everyone, it's Ben Eubanks, host of We're Only Human. I am so glad that you're here with us, and I'm excited today to have a conversation with Alicia Jones. We're going to dive into what it takes to be a great HR business partner, some of the things that are facing HR's challenges today, and we're going to get her insights as someone who's been around the block, we'll say, who has some great experiences to draw on and hear her perspective on what we can do to make the coming year an even better one for all of us who are trying to do the good work of HR every day. So Alicia, welcome. Glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
It's going to be a blast. I'm telling you, I've got my hands all warmed up, going to take some notes, going to get some good takeaways. And hopefully the audience is revved up for that same thing. But before we get into some of the good stuff, could you take a minute and just tell us a little about who you are, what you like to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, my name is Alicia Jones. I am a senior HR business partner for a global portfolio medical company. I have in my career had the privilege to be part of the entire life cycle of a company, from a greenfield startup through acquisitions, divestitures, and even site and business closures. This experience that I've been able to gain has been from a variety of industries and roles, including leadership roles in both HR and operations. So I really enjoy that space that connects those two things.
That's a ton of fun. Do you think that you've had this range of experiences yourself, but do you think that certain personalities or skill sets in HR are better suited to some of the different phases a company could be in? Like the startup is a very different one from a company that's well established and has a bunch of things in place, for example.
Absolutely. And I think something that has always been important to me in all of these different experiences, but just all of the amazing HR people that I've been able to work with across my career, I think it's important to define what HR means for the organization and specifically that role, the role of an HR business partner. Why? Because context matters. To be successful in this type of role, you really have to understand the role within the context of that business environment. And so part of that context is naturally going to be the life cycle that the business is in. And the tools and applications of those tools, or even creative ways to problem solve, may look different across those different points in the organization's life cycle.
Very interesting. Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm thinking about one of my good friends focused on manager enablement and development. And she said one of the problems we have with that is we are not always good as business leaders, as HR teams, at telling managers what good looks like in our business specifically, not just generally, but in our business. Yeah. That same thing applies there. It feels like on the HR side. I've never thought about that parallel, but it probably is a good example too of we need to define what good HR looks like here, whether it's fast paced and, hey, we're willing to be a little bit risky because we've got to just hit this thing, go, or no, the most important thing for us is X and we've got to build everything around that. And that's the linchpin in our strategy from an HR perspective. And defining that before you march out and potentially end up on an island you don't want to end up on, wrong direction, all that good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And whenever I have these conversations about, what do I do, right? There's a lot of misunderstandings about what HR does, and it's quite a very broad scope. And there's lots of definitions out there. One of my favorite centers around the function of our role, which is about predicting, diagnosing, and prescribing actions to improve business performance. Many of the definitions somehow connect the idea between the integration of that business strategy and the people processes. And that's really only going to be successful if you actually understand that business strategy. So you talked about what's the skill set. I think the skill set is being a business leader first. You have to understand the business and that environment in order to understand how to make that bridge and that connection into the people practices and people management that's required at that point in time to deliver those strategic objectives of that business.
So if you're talking, well, you are talking to all of our friends out there in the HR space right now, what do you think, in your opinion, is one of the biggest challenges that's really facing those teams today? The HR leaders, practitioners, people who are in your seat, who are in my seat, trying to do this stuff every day. What do you think are the challenges that are facing them?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question because as any good HR practitioner, I'm going to say, well, it depends, right? It depends on where you're at in that business. What are you working on? Is it, you hear a lot about the state of the talent out there and what that dynamic is like and the changes that are happening. You may see the evolving of the L&D strategies and learning and how you move that along. There's so many different elements that we deal with. For me to synthesize that into one statement, I think it really comes down to bringing people along with you while keeping up with the pace of that change. It's a lot of change. Change is constant. And I don't think that's really all that new or novel. Maybe the nuances are, but it's about how do we keep up with that pace while bringing our people and our organizations along with us for that journey and helping them really evolve and grow at that same rate required for that business.
I'm thinking about this talk I've done lately on some of the data points on HR having a bright future. And one of the things that I talk about within that's so relevant to what you're saying there is that organizational agility, what you're talking about there, keeping up, comes down to two of our superpowers, knowing the people and leading change. If we're not doing those two things in tandem, in combination, all the time, always moving towards something, if you're standing still, you're falling behind, essentially. So I think that's a great call out there.
Yeah. And I love the term agility. The way I've always phrased that and that connection of what you just outlined is really learning agility, right? I think we've moved through and beyond the static way of learning a subject and then we apply it. And the way we do that, it's got to kind of be much more integrative and organic in the processes of, we don't necessarily know what's going to come tomorrow. There's a lot of predictions. We understand some of the impacts of tech and the workforce changes and business changes and all of those things. For us to really be able to keep up with that, it's not about knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. It's about being able to respond to it and having that agility. And I really connected those areas that you mentioned, such as change, into the learning agility. We have to be able to learn, adapt, and grow in a forward momentum towards that shift.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot, Alicia. Are you ready?
Please.
What is something that you have learned in the last year that has helped you in your role as an HR leader?
Oh, there's so many things. For me personally, I actually started my journey down studying for my MBA this year. Yes. And it has been an interesting new thing for me to get back into academic learning, where I feel like I've done so much of it in my career again, day to day with organizations and myself and development of people. But to go back into a traditional academic setting has been a real adjustment. But with the focus on the MBA, I'm not necessarily doing that necessarily for my role or for a specific purpose. It was really for my own personal edification and learning more about the business side, the finances. So going through economic classes, financial analytics, I can tell you now I'm probably not going to be a financial analyst. That is not career 2.0 for Alicia. But having a general understanding, just moving through operations and business, is great, but seeing a little bit more in depth of how some of these methodologies or why some of this stuff is more impactful to the business, I think really for me has been helpful in taking that next step of understanding of that business acumen and really connecting how our businesses need to be successful and some of the pieces that fit into that.
Even if you don't pursue that, and we don't really want you to stay in HR, Alicia, we want to keep you here. You didn't go that direction. Building that skill, as you said, it helps me when I'm talking to my stakeholders on the finance side. I can understand them better. I can get where they're coming from. When they throw that acronym out, I speak their language now. I understand that, right? So some of those things really can help you and plug in there. So the only downside I can see to that, honestly, is I still have those dreams occasionally where you forgot to turn in the test paper. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not may have that dream and it's hopefully not real. So just a fair warning that could be in your future at some point. If it hasn't already happened, it could be in the future. So prepare yourself for that one. Steel yourself mentally in case that comes up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I already am a fan of Excel and data, and I love all things, analytics and those discussions. I have started to see a little bit of that creep in with the side of the financial, statements and things creeping into my Excel dreams. It's an interesting experience.
Well, the other piece of that beyond on the MBA, you mentioned you're on a journey there. I like that connotation is there's other pieces too. Marketing. How do we weave those concepts back into how we are presenting our ideas from an HR perspective and use best practices to make that happen? Like in marketing, they know, hey, listen, someone's got to see this thing 7 times or hear it 7 times before they even really hear it the first time. But in HR, we're like, oh, we told them. Didn't they listen? Like you told them once. It didn't matter to them. Yeah. You didn't hook into their emotions or you didn't find that way to, latch on to their attention in the right way. So no, they didn't get it. You have to send it again and say it again and communicate it again and put it up in the break room or whatever else. I love that it's like all these different pieces. You can find something to bring back into your journey as an HR leader and also enrich that in so many different kinds of ways, whether it's directly, like knowing the finance side to talk to them or bringing in those principles from marketing just to enable better understanding and connection on what you're doing as an HR leader. There's so many different ways to plug that back together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that parallel. And what stands out to me is studying economics. It's a lot of human behavior, but they're pulling in that data to show the insights, right? They're really taking that synthesis of that behavior and showing insights, which I think is a direct parallel to what we're doing in HR, right? We're looking at how our workforce responds and behaves in the context of our business system, and then using data to tell that story. At least I think a lot of us are starting to move that way if we haven't already, to harness the power of the storytelling through that synthesis process with our data.
Alicia, I actually thought about being an economist was my backup career if I didn't like HR for that same exact reason.
Oh,
just because we are on the practical side of influencing behavior change, and all of the evidence and data and experimentation they're using as economists are understanding and covering that every day. We learn something new about how a habit is formed or what it takes to make someone take that step in that direction. And I was fascinated by that and am still today. So I'm with you on that one. There's some really good stuff there. And for anyone out there who's like, econ, we're not talking about macro supply and demand. We're talking about how do I get this one person to take this action today, right now? And those micro interactions are what really is super relevant to our work as HR leaders. So let's transition a bit. I want to ask you, you mentioned this earlier as a tee up, I think, to this really well. So you're talking about the importance of alignment and how to be connected to what the business needs. And you talk about some really critical things there. For anyone out there who is in an HR business partner role like you're in currently, what advice would you give them to make sure they're truly aligned to the team, the leader, the function, whatever group they're supporting? How do they make sure that the work they're doing isn't at cross purposes, isn't disconnected, but is truly every step they're taking is in lockstep with their partners on the business side they're supposed to be supporting?
Yeah, I think for me, there's 2 kind of core things in there. But the way to be an exceptional business partner for me has always been to understand the business. The better I understand their needs and the business and what's happening, the better I can contribute to driving performance through these people mechanisms. And so while we just talked about the economics and marketing and some of these other areas, I don't think we have to be experts in those areas. We don't have to be at their level of operational knowledge or financial knowledge, but understanding the different dynamics that affect the team will help us better design our connection into that business strategy. And what do I mean by that? So things like basic stuff. How do you make money? Do you understand how your business is actually providing value out in the market and making revenue and how that is impacting? Again, if you're in manufacturing, right? How are you doing that with operational efficiency, things like that? Do you understand the strategic goals? And then specifically, the people impact in those strategic goals and so forth. And then, of course, I think it's really important that we understand business risk. What are the risks to the business, even if they're not specifically talent or people related, which I would imagine there's probably some in there, of course, that's going to be directly related, but even some of those indirect risks, that can help you think more long term for planning interventions, programs, whatever it is, and kind of thinking a little bit further down the horizon. Where is the business aiming for? What are the risks that could change that? That way you do have that agility that we talked about earlier, and you can pivot or think differently should the business conditions require that. So being able to kind of do those things and just understand the basic mechanics of your business environment, I think are really critical and key. And second for me is the concept of systems thinking, which I'm a very big fan of. And if you get me talking about that, I could talk about that probably for a whole episode. But it's the idea that we, as HR and business professionals, understand how the parts fit together and influence each other. I think that's a really key area of superpower for HR, is that we often are adjacent to the teams and kind of can have a step back view of the dynamics and what's happening. And being able to do that and have a holistic way of thinking about all of the parts and probably some pretty complex systems helps us invite innovation and be better business partners. And let's not put too fine a point on it. What's probably more complex than people, right? Mm-hmm. And if we can really understand that and how it's all going to fit together and influence, we can really drive some key business performance that way using our amazing talent that we have.
I'm thinking about that through the lens of this exercise I used to do. You would appreciate it so much. When I was working with a group of HR leaders on trying to get them into strategic thinking as a first step for those that are new to that role, maybe a new leader, for example, and going from a doer, right, to a leader of other doers. And one of the things I would do is I had a pair of dice, the little wooden ones that I had taken and written on each of them. So one of them had a bunch of different business problems, like customer satisfaction issues or quality issues, things like that. The other one had HR things we could do, benefits, training, hiring. And so I'd roll those both, and they would have to quickly on the spot talk about how the training would connect back to this quality issue, how we could use that to solve the problem, or how we could use compensation as an incentive to drive this customer satisfaction challenge we were facing. And it was meant to just start quickly seeing those connections and where those might exist. There's not always an easy one, but more often than not, if you're listening and you've got your radar up, like you're saying, you know the language they're using, you know where the revenue comes from, you know the margins, business unit you're in, like all those sorts of things make you aware of where those opportunities might exist. But if you don't spend the time to do that, you stay in your bubble, your little HR bubble, you talk only HR speak, and you miss the chance to really bring the most value there. Yeah, you may take, process actions and answer questions and things like that, but you'll never really be that true partner that you're talking about here. That's my argument, at least anyway.
Yeah, I'm smiling and laughing here because I think back to in my early career, I kind of learned this lesson a little bit the hard way, which was I had all these big ideas and, we can do these amazing programs or HR things and let's do this and drive it. And I hadn't considered the maturity of the organization and the desire to even absorb something like that. Because again, if you're speaking HR language versus their language, sometimes there can be a disconnect in the value that those items bring. I really like your dice game there because it's connecting the two. First, what problem are we trying to solve? What is it that the business is trying to either accomplish or change or whatever that is? And then how can we show, hey, all of these different people dynamics, people management, people, right, whether it's talent acquisition, skill building, whatever, this can directly apply to that problem and how we can drive value there for the business performance. And I didn't quite have that early in my career when I was very tenacious and I was very driven and I had all these big ideas. And it was very hard to kind of hit that wall of the business of like, well, why do this stuff? So I think we get a much easier pathway when we start with the business side first and then bring in the people elements to say, this is how we can achieve that through people.
Now my turn to smile big. I've done that wrong, by the way, too. I think all of us maybe, that are a little bit.
Maybe we've all learned that way.
We learned that lesson the hard way. And if you haven't learned that lesson yet, you probably will. Because what I'm finding is I can tell you not to do something, but until you do it yourself and feel that pain, like, oh, Yeah, they were right. It's hard to talk someone out of that.
Yeah.
But I remember trying to pitch and get investment for a performance management tool to help us. And the primary benefit I said was like making my job easier. And that's not an answer for any. This does not care. You can't even not laugh at
I was
that.
like, they were like, and?
What? Yes. Like, is that all? So yes, I learned my lesson early on. Position the business, position the benefit for the people, like all those things, really critical in that. One of the ways I've been talking about what you just shared, by the way, in a way that I'm trying to find a good, catchy way to say what you were saying there about how to get them interested and get aligned on that is we're always like pushing to get the things on the HR agenda on the business agenda. And the way I've talked about it lately is we'll never get our leadership invested until we get them interested. And the way you get them interested is going through, and someone listening out there right now, listen to what Alicia is saying, how she's talking about positioning this, how she's talking about aligning here, knowing what matters to them. It's not pushing at them, it's pulling them along and being a good steward of the resources in HR, being a good steward of the people, connecting them in where the problems exist. I'm just saying, hey, if you want it, I got an idea over here, take it or leave it. But I'm seeing some things that there could be an opportunity to reduce this issue here or to improve that result there. And it's using the people you already have on staff. And usually when you show up with that kind of idea, people are generally interested in hearing what you have to say if you approach it that way. If it's, hey, listen, you're doing that wrong. I want to let you know, because you probably didn't know that you're doing it wrong. And I want to step in and tell you how to do it right. That's not going to be received well. We need to back that off just a little bit. So again, not that I ever did that exactly like that, but might have learned that lesson again early in my career on how to approach those sorts of things. So we've talked around some of these things. I don't know that you've answered this one specifically for me yet, because you've given some good inputs here transparently for everybody out there and for you, Alicia. Like, as I was planning for today's conversation, I wanted this to be the sort of how-to class, like master class for being a great business partner. And so far, you have delivered on that. So I'm going to give you one or two more questions before we finish to make sure that you cap that off, because I think this is so critical. And a lot of the education out in the world is very specific to certain roles, to certain functions or parts of HR, benefits or recruiting or training. And HR business partner touches a little bit of everything usually in their work. So if someone is out there either doing this work currently or is thinking about like, hey, I would love to be a business partner at some point in my career, what do you think are the one or two skills potentially, or there might be just like one that stands out that makes someone really great at being an HR business partner?
That's a tough question, because I think there's so many, right?
What are the top
I think one of the top long lists that I have. I think one that stands out immediately on my mind is integrity, right? In this role and being this relationship with the business leaders, but also your workforce, right? And the population that you're dealing with every day. It's a really critical role that you are that bridge between them. And you are often in a role of trust, and you must lead by example. You have to have that really strong sense of integrity that really comes from how you show up in the workplace and how you drive your balance between the two, right? And doing the right thing for the individual and the person. And that's not always easy, to be that bridge, to balance that between employee advocacy and the business needs. And I think a lot of that comes from the place of integrity. And I think that's a very large one. You can interpret that many ways, right? Being authentic, having courage, having resiliency, I think, would be another big one in our line of work. I've always said I get to do the most wonderful, amazing things with people, helping them develop and grow and take on challenges. But you also, the downside of that too, you see people that struggle and have, really difficult decisions and things that they go through on both professional and personal levels. So yourself, you need resiliency to be able to manage yourself through that, as well as then in turn, help your people that you're working with. I think those are probably the top ones from a behavioral leadership skill, from technical skills. Again, I think we have such a wide range of focus areas, from organizational effectiveness to learning and development, the employee experience, talent, total rewards. There's so much in there. But I think the technical side, I am very driven by the concept of being able to pull insights from data. Data isn't enough anymore. It's really about synthesizing that and pulling the connections out. in order to drive an action plan or drive business performance. So you have to have, again, those elements of that business acumen, as well as your knowledge in your HR background as well, and be able to bring those things together in a bigger picture.
Number one.
And there's more. I'm holding back, obviously. I'm like, I'd love to list like 5 more.
Well, it's like number one, those are great. I'm so glad you went with a more of a human skill side of that, the integrity piece. Like that piece is really critical. But then going over to the technical side, saying, if you want to be able to do something more specific to your job, here's a good one. And number two, I feel like you have been looking over my shoulder for the last week because I'm writing a summary, a description for some research we're going to be working on early next year. And the focus is around how to be data-driven as an HR team. And the problem is so much of the research out there is, well, you should just measure these 10 things. And so many, you've probably been there like I have. Okay, I've done this. Now what? I'm like, well,
now what? What do you do with that? What do you mean?
What do I do? So they talk about the what, but they don't talk about the how or the why. What do you do with this once you're done? How do you get someone invested and excited? How do you take this and change a behavior? Going back to the earlier conversation on behavior, like how do we use this stuff? As you're saying, pull the insights and then know what to do next. That's the really hard part. The easy part in many cases is gathering the data. The hard part is knowing what to do with it and then making that actually happen. So I'm glad you really called that one out. I'll be using this. Yeah. I'll be using your comment there forever, basically, to that one. It's tremendous, wonderful. What was if you have another one sort of top of mind, was there one more like right behind those? Like this was competing for the top slot there, and I went with integrity and pulling data insight. Yeah. Is there another one right behind that? I wish I could have mentioned this one.
Yeah, I think the runner-up there is definitely going to be influencing and persuasion, right? A lot of times we are not in roles of positional authority or positional power, right? So we have to influence, and you said it well earlier of, hey, business leader, here's your problem. I have some ideas, and you have to influence them to see it in a different light, because often their lens is going to be their functional lens, right? Operational, finance, whatever. And you have to help them see that connection and influence how that's going to positively impact their initiative. Sometimes you're influencing leaders to behave differently, right? Then maybe they're not doing things in their best interest or the most productive ways. So I think influence and persuasion would be another big one for me.
Yeah, I want to keep going down the list with you. That's incredible. But right there, again, this met my goal of anyone out there who is an HR business partner already that needed some things directly from someone who's doing it and doing it well, that got that from this episode. If anyone out there is trying to get the other direction, they think they want to do that, you're early in their career, maybe that's an opportunity there. Or maybe you're made it to an HR manager job. I'm like, managing, I don't want to be a leader of people. I want to be a doer again. Great insights on how to step back into that role and do it well, maybe at another company. So I've really enjoyed this. If someone wants to connect with you or follow you, are you okay if they reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of the old school LinkedIn open networkers. So I always welcome connections and love talking to anybody who'll listen to me about systems thinking or any of these concepts. I would love to connect.
Perfect. I'll make sure and get that link into the show notes, and everyone out there can reach out there and let you know that they heard about you on the podcast here. So thank you so much again for joining me. You're a tremendous, incredible conversation, and I wish we had another hour to go deeper. Like this is, we'll have to come back again at some point and do a round 2, a 201 class, maybe your 301 class on how to be a business partner that has an impact. Thank you, Alicia.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
To everybody else out there, hope you got your good notes like I did from today's conversation. Some great ideas and insights on how to do this. Think about your integrity. Think about how to get insights from the data that are out there. And we'll catch you again next time on We're Only Human.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.